Okay, so welcome to a new episode of Legends and Leaders. It's great to have Duncan here, who's just created so many amazing characters and been a part of the Ben 10 series and Generator Rex, created the Spider-Man, one of the Spider-Man TV shows, Ultimate Spider-Man, Avengers Assemble. So many wonderful projects that you brought out to the world. It's incredible to have you here, Duncan. Thanks for coming.
Well, thanks for having me, Ben.
Awesome.
My
So
pleasure.
I'd love to just start with a bit of like just a bit of your past. So when you were a kid, Duncan, growing up, were you always into comic books and drawing? Like, how did this passion start?
Oh, definitely. Grew up in a big house. What I mean by that is that I had three older brothers um, and one bathroom. So it was a crowded. It was a very crowded house, and so I spent a lot of time in my own head. Yeah, I think it was a way of kind of isolating myself a little bit when needed. Uh, and so I think I discovered comics on a family car trip somewhere and fell in love with them. My mom was an art teacher, grammar school art teacher. My dad was a graphic artist. He worked in advertising. So I definitely grew up around art. So I started drawing comics at an early age, just kind of copying the stuff that I loved looking at. And all my brothers went and became lawyers and engineers, so they realized there was very little money in art. But I was the youngest, and so yes, I fell in love with comics when I was around 17. I kind of stopped for a while. I went
Huh.
into other pursuits for a while. Not too far away from art, but I think I stopped. I, I didn't go to school for art per se. I went to school actually for film and TV and acting. And
Hmm.
then I moved out to California to become a big movie star. Uh, and quickly realized just how big and huge and how many other people were doing the exact same thing. So instead of doing the waiter thing, um, I started working in film production, doing everything behind the camera, um, every aspect of it, including storyboards. I started doing storyboards with different directors because I could draw. And it was something that even when I went to school and college, I took art courses. I just didn't major in it. Um, but I started doing storyboards for some pretty big movies too. I actually started having quite a film career there as a storyboard artist. And then while I was working on a film, a very famous comic book artist who I knew when I was younger was doing the creature design for it was a science fiction movie. He was doing the
Okay.
creature design for it. And he saw my storyboards and said, "Have you ever considered doing some comic book work?" Because he had a studio himself. And I knew who he was. I was a huge fan of his. This was Neil Adams, if you know who that is. He had a studio. He just recently passed away, but he was a very influential artist in the late 60s throughout the 70s. He was kind of considered the new wave. They were like the older guys who kind of started Marvel and also to a degree kind of revamped DC. And he came in as kind of the second tier, the next wave, and he was most definitely at the spearhead of a new style. And it was a much more graphic style, and it was very fresh and most definitely caught my attention when I was a kid. So when he asked me, I was very thrilled by it, but I hadn't considered doing that. But when I started thinking about instead of doing the waiter thing or doing any of the other kind of very work intensive kind of stuff, the idea of drawing comic books and then being able to go out and pursue other things on my own schedule became very attractive. So I started doing that, and then little did I know that if you're going to do full time comics, it's a full time job itself too. So I started doing full time comics. I worked for Marvel and DC. I drew comics for both of them, the X Men, Superman. And during that time, I met Joe Kelly, Steve Siegel, and Joe Casey, who were all writers at the time. and we all enjoyed working with each other. We were working on most of the flagship books for Marvel at one point, and most of the flagship books for DC later on, and kind of looking at the Image model, the guys who went and created Image Comics. We were great admirers of that. We decided we would kind of form our own collective, and we created a Man of Action. While working for Marvel, Steve and I also created the characters of Big Hero 6 for the title, the Big Hero 6, which later was bought by Marvel, was bought by Disney, and then Disney Animation turned into the show. So that was something that we created very early on, having no idea that it would become what it became later. But then when we formed Man of Action, one of the very first things out of the box was Ben 10. Um, Ben had come about when we were working on the X-Men. One of the big fun things, and also in the 90s, the X-Men were it. That was it. Everybody loved the X-Men. It was the number one selling books, period. Really, the MCU and everything with Iron Man and Captain America, those were comics that I liked as a kid, but they were not the titles that were selling in the 90s. Those were very antiquated, old titles by that point. It's very funny that they got revamped. So we were working on the X-Men, and one of the big things on working on the X-Men was always trying to come up with new mutants, people who had unusual powers. And I had jokingly said we should come up, we should probably bring in this character I had come up with at the time called Entourage, which was a character that could change places with themselves from a multiverse. And we kind of took that idea, and then it slowly extrapolated itself into Ben 10, later on Aliens, and using the Omnitrix. But we always loved the notion that Ben remained a kid. That was very important to us, and that also that the show had a multi-generational quality to it, that there was a grandfather in it, because so much of that stuff at that time, and actually for a while before that, it was always just the super smart kid outwitting all the adults. And here we just had a kid who had powers, and then maybe had to look to his family and friends and peers, and how best to use these gifts that he had gotten. And we liked that dynamic, which was something actually that heralded back to an earlier comic book kind of format. Things like Shazam, Captain Marvel, things like that. Um, so then Ben 10, and then Ben 10 became Ben 10, which was its own creature, and had no idea that it would become what it became. And that was wonderful, obviously. And so that being our very first project out of the gate, we started getting a lot of different work. So we worked on a lot of different shows over a period of time. So my storyboard background, my film and production, and also the other guys all had similar kind of when you want to work in the arts. I don't think it's very much. It's not the same as like if you're going to become an engineer, you have to have a very strong discipline in mechanical engineering or in aerodynamics or something like that. And it's a very specific skill set that you have to have. When you want to kind of create art, you pull it from a lot of different sources. So each one of us had just as varied backgrounds that would be, I guess, in the creative field, but ultimately a lot of different types of discipline. And
Mm,
so mine being kind of an art background, the storytelling background, and then production. That's how it helped me, at least, as we started navigating a lot of the film and TV, some of the credits you mentioned.
mm,
Um, Other things, all the whole time we've been working and creating our own comic books at that time, and then trying to set them up as their own
mm.
shows after that, with varying successes. And Generator Rex being another one that was based on a book that Joe Kelly and I had created called Mockin' Rex, or M Rex. Um, so,
So like in terms of the idea for Ben 10, like so you were working on X-Men, you kind of took like a similar concept you were thinking there, applied it here. How did you come up with the whole like the world that they're in? Like there's so many other characters,
hmm,
Kevin, there's Gwen. Like where did that all come from? And then How did you guys really kickstart it and get it out there and get the traction for it? Was it the Cartoon Network show that really helped make it big?
Oh, absolutely. It was absolutely. And with anything, when something big like that show happens, there's a lot of different people who come in and help contribute to it. So, and everybody that we worked with, maybe this was where it best answers your question is that we came from a sensibility of a character like Spider-Man who had 60 years of history. There was different
Hmm.
times that you could pull from, but what you did understand is that there was a rich, deep world that they needed to
Yeah.
exist in, and that from week to week, different things you could pull from different time periods, and kind of cherry pick the best stuff. So, world building, which is an essential part of what we do, you come up with a great character, but if there's not a great world for that character to live in, it's a great concept, but it will only run for so long. It only has so much legs. Um, so one of the big things, obviously, with a character who can, and this was one of the initial ideas for that has specifically been, was the idea of walking in somebody else's shoes for a little while. That's why Asmuth created the Omnitrix and um, the original conceit of it. So walking in somebody else's shoes, but putting that in a galactic background, that just
Yeah.
opened up the canvas and gave us an awful lot of things to pull from. So, uh, each one of us had ideas and lots of ideas for aliens and things like that, but we worked with a great crew of people, including people like Dwayne McDuffie and Glenn Murakami, and they come from the same type of background, so they were also pulling in concepts and ideas. So once you have an idea that has some legs on it, and what I mean by legs, I mean that there's a lot of possibilities. You don't just tell one story. You've got a lot of different stories. Then you have to create a cast around that character who's going to challenge him in a lot of ways. Um, Kevin is going to be a rival, so he's going to do stupid things when he's with Kevin. Um, uh, in a lot of ways, Gwen's a rival, but also a loving rival, somebody you care for. So he might not do. They might learn lessons together, and she's actually a lot more intelligent than Ben is. I think ultimately Ben is more, let's say, emotional, and that she was probably a little more intellectual about her approach on things. So you could have those kind of dynamics. So you could tell stories about that. Each one of us at different times we've done things that we regret because it was an emotional decision, and then sometimes the logical one can be too conservative, and you need that emotional one to push you into a solution or get you in the right mindset to solve an issue. So stories like that. And then Grandpa was always a great mitigating force. And I think the thing that we liked the most about Grandpa Max was his own hidden story. You know a character, you think you know this individual, and then when you get to know them, you realize that they have a deep past themselves, and one that could be just as exciting. So then we had a whole historical aspect to it with the plumbers and everything that came into that. So it gave us with just that initial cast, it gave us a lot of options for different types of stories. So we weren't just telling the same story again and again. Um, and when you have that kind of diversity of different avenues with a character, you can tell a lot of different stories. So then it's just unleash your imagination and let it run. And then obviously a big fun thing is coming up with all the aliens. So
Yeah. But why did you guys decide to do it as like a watch? Like, why was it the watch? Was the device that was used?
believe me, we had a lot of different types of things, but ultimately, and there was a lot of reasons. There's prop reasons. Like at one point, it was going to be a 10-sided die that he would
Mm,
roll, and it would have stuff. At one point, it was more kind of like a wand kind of thing that if you did it in different settings and things like that, and we had all of these different devices, we knew that we wanted a physical prop. And then this was also an ask from Cartoon Network specifically. When they started thinking about merchandising, they wanted to have stuff. So that was one of the ideas, but I forget, it was maybe Joe Casey or Steve Siegel or somebody said, and then when they do that, it's hero time. And then there's like hero time. Oh, well, a watch. That would be great. The obviously became the watch shape. Um, and what that did, unlike a 10-sided die, you only have 10 sides on that. So, you could only go to 10 different things. With this, and then the idea of Azimuth, it just clicked. It became the right idea. It's kind of like Ben gets compared every once in a while, and I guess I can see why in some ways to the Green Lantern, in the sense that the Green Lantern can think of things and use it.
Right.
And it's with the ring. So I'm not quite sure. I completely get the one, the comparison there. To me, it was always a little more closer to like a Shazam, or there's a character called Dial H for Hero, which was something that. But those weren't really the. I mean, Shazam was probably the closest comp out of that. But so he had a saying, and his thing was that he had all of these different powers from all these different Greek gods, like the fastest Hermes, smartest Solomon kind of thing. And we loved the idea of a character that could pull from a lot of different places. It wasn't just one thing. Much like a kid, you're constantly learning, so you're pulling from a lot of places. So the watch just became a perfect device for all of those kind of theories and concepts.
And why name the character Ben? Like, was there any reason?
Uh,
It just yeah.
we actually, it was Ben for a lot. I don't, the initial name was, and 10. It actually started off as the title was Force 10. We were calling it. And we just went with 10 being just a good round number. And then Force 10 was just, it was a little too macho. It was a little too tough. And also it didn't capture all of the other things about the family unit and all of those kind of things that we wanted to have. So 10 stayed. So then the rhyming couplet of Ben 10 kind of came out of that, actually. And I do remember me pushing for it to be Ben to the 10th power, because we wanted to
Mm,
go with more than 10 possibilities. And that means nothing, right? Ben to the 10th power. What does that mean? It was just
yeah.
I thought it was a cool visual to have a little Ben and then a little 10th power up in the corner there. But it got vetoed. It was a little too heady, I think, for people. Um,
Yeah.
and also the whole multiverse thing, which now, look at us, we're in the world of multiverses all over the place,
Mhm.
was a little too much. So uh, Cartoon Network had floated superheroes to us, and that was way too close to this character called Dial H for Hero. It's like, well, no, it's just Dial H for Hero. We're not going to do that. And so then we came across Aliens as and also, once again, it fit the idea of walking in somebody else's shoes for a little while. So
Do you think there's gonna be like when we're in the age of superhero movies right now? There's just tons of them. Do you think there'll be like another like Ben 10 superhero movie that comes out like in theaters? Is that something that you would
well,
like to see
sure.
happen?
Listen, well, I mean, we get asked this question a lot, and where is the next iteration for Ben and things like that. And I can't speak to any of them specifically at any time. All I can say is that there's been a lot of different discussions about a lot of different types of approaches. Um,
Hmm.
some really radically wild ideas, approaches, and things like that. But what's happening right now with where Cartoon Network is, and all of the different kind of streamers, and the fact that Ben isn't even actually showing on Cartoon Network but on HBO or Netflix now, and these were sister companies at one point, and now the whole thing is up for grabs as the dust settles, and there's a little more kind of even feel for where and how stuff is going to come out. I do think then, because Man of Action, we can develop stuff and we can say, hey, we'd like to do this, but that only takes you up to the door. There's decision makers, and ultimately, Cartoon Network. or the sister companies or the father companies now of Cartoon Network own the rights to it. So,
Mhm.
um, what will happen? Who knows? I do think that I'll tell you a little. I was just talking to Joe Casey about this the other day. Um, and around the turn of the century, there, back in the year 2000, 2001 ish, I worked over at a .com company called Stanley Media. I worked with
Uh-huh.
Stan Lee. He was trying to get um, uh, his own kind of channel back when the internet was really still a fledgling thing.
Mhm.
Um, we were starting to develop cartoons based on new characters and things like that. But the most curious thing was is that or Stan at that point was the editor in chief and the creator of Spider-Man and all those things, but they did not have the same cachet that they do now. I mean,
Mhm.
Stan Lee is now, uh, you know, uh, considered on par, and after all of his appearances in all these movies and stuff like that, as kind of a Walt Disney like character. But back in the
Mhm.
year 2000, just to get a meeting with animation companies was not necessarily an easy task. So, my point being is give a little time and then all of a sudden look at where Stan is now, or his memory is now, and his influence is now. Who time will tell. So with Ben, time will tell. Ultimately,
Right.
the hope is always, obviously, that would be great. That is something that we would love to do, and is something we're prepared to do. But is it in the stars at the moment? Not at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, what Viacom did with like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was like they when they acquired it. I mean, that's when they really blew it up. So it was just kind of the right partner at the right time, and then now there's going to be there's going to be an animated movie that hits theater. So well, hopefully we'll see something there. That would definitely be great.
Yeah, and it was also what was interesting about the Turtles is, gosh, when did that very first feature come out? Was that early 90s? The early 90s it came out. There was a feature that
I think
came
so.
out. It kind of been
Maybe
moved.
earlier.
Yeah, it kind of moved. In the cartoon at that time, it was perfect timing. It
Mhm.
had pushed it into a certain kind of category for a while that everybody knew it. So a lot of the execs are very risk adverse, and like you said, the right partner, somebody who loves the characters, knows it, and knows because in my mind it's a no brainer. If this
Mhm.
was done correctly, it would be just as big as any of the other shows that come out there. In my mind, it's really when they first
Mhm.
said that they were going to do the Iron Man movie, people were like, "Oh no!" I was like, "That's a no-brainer." It's just an idea of a guy wearing a really cool. It's like James Bond, but with a seriously cool armor. You know, people who know nothing about comic books will buy into that. And I think that this one, the idea of a kid who gets infused with alien DNA and can take on those things, it's something that travels well. It's an idea that travels well. So I think it's a
Yeah,
no-brainer. Well, we'll see, though.
I think so. What do you think is the future for Generator Rex, and like what do you think will be the next steps for the character, and where you want to build that brand?
Well, so Generator X is in the same legal limbo right now that Ben is in. So wherever Cartoon Network and the rights and all of those characters settle is where Rex would settle as well. Um, the plan for us always, and this was something that we were talking with at the time, Tram Wigsel, who was the executive creative exec over at Cartoon Network, who we were working with. We had always talked about trying to build out a Cartoon Network version of their own MCU with characters that were based inside of and that were weekly cartoons that they could control and that we could start having crossovers with characters and things like that. And Ben had that a very successful crossover with Rex. And we wanted to continue those kind of things. And we even tried to do that again with this last iteration of Ben, was bring in Rex in a different way. So Rex is another one that we really love, and also we think has the ability to have legs. And when Rex first came out, it was a little darker. One of the things that we were asked by Cartoon Network at the time was to age it up a little, maybe create a character that appealed to a slightly older demographic, and we were very excited by that. But what we found was in other markets, different places, they thought it was a little too scary. The monster designs were a little too scary, so it was a little more difficult for it to kind of have the bigger appeal that Ben had. But I wouldn't want to sacrifice any of those things. I think it's a slightly different, it's a slightly darker story with
Hmm.
him than with Ben. So um, the love, the idea would always be to, I think in a lot of ways would be a fantastic live action movie, a big giant budget thing where he eventually does, you know, maybe become that ultimate version of himself. And there was always this big storyline, and we even had it that the Agent Six, who was kind of tasked there to be his bodyguard slash babysitter slash friend. If Ben ever got too powerful or too crazy, he was assigned to take him out. You know, and that's dark in of itself. But I would love to see that on live action TV at some point. It was to me that's good. That's good filmmaking fodder. So, but
Yeah,
no big. No, in a lot of ways, Ben. Whatever happens, it'll probably be Ben first before it would be Rex. But
right.
we're always trying to bring Rex into things too, because we do think he's a character in his world, and the nanite world is something that everybody already is very. At the time,
Mhm.
it was actually it's very funny. That was an initial concept that we had way early on for Iron Man. If we were going to do Iron Man, was the nanites, and look, they kind of brought it into the comic books at some other point too. But so it was going to happen. The idea of the armor literally coming out of you, kind of. Yeah.
Mhm.
But we
Yeah,
also like the idea with Rex that he was a character that what you put into this kid is what you're going to get out. You get if you put in caring, love, respect, you're going to those are the those would be the builds that he would ultimately make. Things that would protect people, help people. If you treated them poorly, if they got knocked around and discarded and marginalized and pushed over, the things that they would build would represent that inner life. That was always about that character, and thought that that was also a very mature kind of concept.
have you thought of creating like any new characters, or there's some that are on your horizon now that you're like,
Oh,
okay, we're gonna
sure.
roll with
Yeah.
them?
No, no. Always, always. We have a deep library of stuff.
Mhm.
At the moment, the climate for new stuff as opposed to working on, and this is now just ultimately these are about making, you know, getting financial partners. They're much more along the lines right now about visiting tried and true IP, things that have already had a pre-life. They're a little,
Right.
right now the market is not about a whole bunch of new stuff, but yes, we do. So we often publish those things. That's always been our first and foremost, our primary outlet was to publish and um, get those things out there that way so that they have some kind of life. And ultimately, that was our background. That's where we started, was with comic books. And you can tell the story the way without anybody else's input. You can tell the story the way that you felt like it needed to be told. So it's still that's where we find ourselves putting our effort into our newer titles at the moment. Because right now we're working on Sonic for Netflix, the Sonic Prime
Right.
show, and then another show that we're doing right now that I could talk about is we're working with a video game company called Tiny Build. They have this really fun game called Hello Neighbor, which is kind of you sneak into your neighbor's next door.
Okay.
It's very much kind of like a Stranger Things, or it's got this kind of your neighbor is up to something no good, and you've got to find out what it is, kind of story. In the industry terms, it's also called a kids with flashlights story. So it's kids with flashlights on bikes kind of story. But we've been working with them, and we had 2 episodes come out on the Tiny Build site. We're releasing it on YouTube, which is really fun
Hmm.
because we don't have anybody telling us what we can and can't do as far as content goes. And so we can get a little darker. We can be a little tougher with the stories. And I think that that was something that we were also very excited about. Kind of pull out our inner Stephen Kings and our inner Alfred Hitchcocks a little bit and tell those stories. So we are finding creative outlets for those kind of things, but they are in unusual places because right now the marketplace is so different than it was even 10 years ago. So,
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I think that, I think this is all the time we have anyway. So, but last question I would just ask is, do you for the Sonic Prime series that you're doing now, where do you think that this series is going to wind up in terms of new character development? Do you think you'll be able to introduce any types of like new characters into the Sonic family that you think will be lasting in that? Were you able to do stuff like that from a creative
oh yeah,
perspective?
absolutely. No, that was actually we had long talks with the guys over at the Sonic teams, and what they were hoping to accomplish. Sonic had been around for 30 years, and
Yeah.
it had 2 or 3 different backgrounds, and one of them they wanted to kind of separate from Sonic Classic to Sonic Now kind of things, and he had quite a diaspora of kind of lore and legends, and they were hoping that we could help them simplify and kind of consolidate and bring. That was one goal. The other one was to
Hmm.
reintroduce the character to a newer generation, and then the third was to well, make an action hero that would kind of have new legs
Yeah.
for the new media, and so inside of that, those were the things that they had asked for us. And so one of the things of coming up with the Shatterverse was the idea of what one of the things with their characters is some of them, a lot of them, are ideas. They aren't fully fleshed out characters. They don't have a whole lot of permutation. They don't have a whole lot of intricacies. They don't have a lot of levels. And some of even their more major characters. We wanted to split them up and have Sonic see that there was other aspects to each one of these characters that were his best friends, people he thought he knew, but didn't realize that they also had these other elements inside of their personality. And that is going through this adventure, he's discovering that they have different shades inside of them. And so these shades are kind of the characters that he's being introduced to in this first iteration. But even inside of that, I mean, listen, everybody loves Shadow, and he's always going to be there. That was a character that they didn't want us splitting up. But taking a look at Amy, people really like Rusty Rose. She's become a kind of we're, we kind of hope that she would become an interesting character. This kind of almost in a lot of ways the logical side of Amy, not the emotional side. There is in everybody a little logical side. So let's take a look at that character. Rusty Rose was a character. There's a couple of the characters that are coming out of there. I don't, without spoiling too much, because I don't know if you've seen it or when this airs, but the second drop just came out, and we have a big twist at the end with one of Sonic's best friends, or a version of one of his best friends that is a little tired of always taking Sonic's, being his like he's always been his number one champion, but he's also any of his own feelings and needs have always been supplanted by Sonic's wants. So here's somebody who's going to go, wait a second, I want to assert myself a little more. And that's the character 9, which is going to be an interesting character in the next drop. Suffice to say. So there's without spoiling it too much for people who haven't seen it yet, there's a twist in that. So that was one thing. Now, as far as the life of the show moving forward, we are talking with the Sega team, our our partners in the animation front over at WildBrain, and with Netflix about the next iteration. And there's a couple of things. I don't have anything I can announce there, but there are absolute plans. And there is also now, once we've kind of secured this notion, we'll start building out and bringing in other characters, and we'll be bringing in a much wider variety of characters to kind of explore in some different ways. But I think one of the big things that we wanted to do with this was that a lot of the TV shows of Sonic up to this point were emphasizing the comedy,
Mm.
except for like Sonic X, and those were almost always coming more from the anime background, where they were making him the action hero that he is. Also, he's a lot he's he's he shares an awful lot with a Spider-Man type of character. But I think that the American treatments were kind of going more with this jokester side. They were going more with just his Bugs Bunny kind of side, the kind of silly, goofy side. And that's fine. That is an aspect of that character, and it's a lovely aspect too. But there's also this action forward thing. And we definitely wanted to lean into the action forward aspects of him. And so I think
Yeah.
that that's something that we'll keep on doing.
Yeah, makes sense. Look, Duncan, I appreciate you coming on and sharing really, some of about how you create some of these wonderful different IPs and just characters and shows. It's definitely been, fascinating learning from your journey, and I wish you continued success and keep creating.
Oh, thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. And if you guys keep watching it, we'll keep on creating. And
Of course.
also go out there and create some of your own stuff too. It's fun. Even, we're living in a world now, you can put anything up on the internet. You'll find some people who will love it. So that's my advice to everybody. Everybody's got a good story inside of them somewhere.